in Geneva and has just returned from Geneva after some period of time there, working on the Universal Periodic Review of Human Rights of the U.S. And we're just delighted to have you. David, is this in his face? Okay. Good, thank you. Please just go ahead and tell us what you've learned and what you think we can be doing and how we can get involved.
Okay, so it's an honor to be here. I did just get back from Geneva. This time last week, the U.S. just concluded its second Universal Periodic Review. It recorded a record number of 348 recommendations. In our first review, we had 228, so that's an increase. You could see it either as we're not getting better at human rights, or that U.S. civil society is improving its advocacy abilities and sharing the issues from impacted individuals better at the global level. So it was an okay second review, to be honest, among friends. We were successful in all the work that we did, bringing the issues forward to the international level. You can see the impact. But between friends, I think definitely just a week out, I'm looking at ways that we'll have to actually revise and amend the UPR in its future cycles, because you have a tremendous amount of overlap. You know, we've had so many recommendations about the death penalty. We had so many recommendations on treaties that we need to ratify. And we thought that's great, because obviously they're telling the U.S. government what they need to do. But if already 40 countries have given that recommendation, we're trying to figure out ways that we can speak with governments to, okay, ditto on the first 40 countries, but we also think this issue needs to be addressed, because there's a lot more that maybe didn't get enough attention. Human rights education could have gotten a lot more recommendations, and many other groups that came and went to the UN in the last year also should have deserved more merit but didn't get that. So just reflecting now more, but on an exciting note, thinking next steps and what we can do. This is really just concluding the third of the fifth of the 5 phases of the Universal Periodic Review. We've had the preparation phase, where you helped write 5-page reports. We had the preparation phase, where we had many dialogues with different chapters and divisions to raise issues that they wanted to be brought to the UN. The interactive phase, we did a great job with hosting UPR diplomacy dialogues here in New York as well as in Washington, D.C. And then we just concluded the third phase of the consideration of the U.S., which was the 3.5-hour review, where over 122 countries made questions and recommendations, and each one got 1 minute and 5 seconds to say what they wanted to about the United States. Immediately following that, there's exactly a lot of reason to giggle, and it was almost like an auctioneer at some point, going 7, going 7, going economic, social, cultural rights, yeah, but it was quite exciting. But the reason I just start off with things that we need to improve upon is, when you're doing your second cycle, it's also a constant thing of how we improve from the first to the second, and now thinking how we'll need to improve from the second to the third. But right now, an important thing that also happened was we met with the U.S. government delegation headed by Ambassador Keith Harper. That was from 2:30 till 5. And that was a good interactive discussion with the U.S. agencies directly involved for implementing these recommendations. We had Health and Human Services, Housing and Urban Development, Department of Justice, State Department. So it was good to meet them directly and see who was Department of Interior on Indigenous Affairs. So that was also very good. The one thing we didn't get, which we hoped for, was a specific date that we would have a follow-up meeting. So everyone's in the room in Geneva. We requested that we would know when the government would want to meet again on how to implement these recommendations. They're like, oh, it's so soon and it's so difficult to get everybody in the same room. And we're like, exactly. That's why we asked you in March and April to kind of set a date so that when we meet on May 11th, we would know it's going to be June. It's going to be July, it's going to be August. It's going to be September right before the adoption, but didn't come up with that. So that's one disappointment. It also moved from a town hall, which was much more interactive, to a consultation, but I'd say civil society did a great job at engaging the different agencies and asking questions and wanting more of a discussion as opposed to just canned speeches. So I think that went really well. Where that puts us now between the consideration to the adoption in September to the implementation after September is how can we engage our chapters and divisions to find out what did happen in Geneva, but more importantly, continue providing input and a little bit of polite political pressure on what recommendations we all think are the most important. So Ginger shared a document I made that was too long, that was 40 pages, but we knocked it down to around 12. And it was around 10 steps of what we could do around putting pressure to make sure our government adopts these recommendations. Because the problem with the UPR is any government can say we don't accept that recommendation, and then the recommendation, that's it, it's just gone. The only thing it does do is it raises attention, but you'd much rather have the recommendation be adopted and accepted so that we can try to implement it. So what we're gonna do is we're taking the 348 pages of legalese and slightly confusing text most people would not want to read, and just simplifying each recommendation. So recommendation 1 will just be like 4 words. U.S. ratification of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights Covenant. And just simple, abolish death penalty. And then what we'll ask, one of the ideas would be asking chapters and divisions members that they can take selfies with just writing down which recommendation they really think is important, or making short videos of 2 minutes only of why this recommendation would be very significant in public policy on a domestic or foreign level. And those are just things that we're gonna do, because the truth is, it won't ever get beyond us if we don't share about the UPR. And for the US, it's really the last time we're gonna have an opportunity to address global issues or being before the UN for probably at least 4 years. So we're not gonna have that again, either with CERD or CAT or Human Rights Committee. So we kinda have 3 months, 4 months before September to talk to everybody more about what the UPR is, why it's significant. And it was a great process. We call it the Uniting People for Rights. More people learned about human rights, more people learned about the treaty bodies, what we have and haven't ratified. It was a great teaching tool. So I think as UNA USA, it's a great opportunity for us to engage the wider public, as well as really dig deep into our chapters and allow people to get involved. Because a lot of people always say, well, what can I do? And what's my ability? And this UPR is a great one to say, contact, and we can identify, the new Attorney General, Loretta, to be able to focus on this, or specific folks in other, or President Obama or Secretary Kerry. So it's easy campaigns of creative things that we can do. And so we have one idea that we'll have a small aspect at the annual meeting in Washington DC on the 7th, so that's one good thing. At the founding UN celebration, June 26th, we have our annual event we've done, and we'll be doing that as well. We have 7 panels on how to implement these recommendations in San Francisco. San Francisco. So there's a bunch of things that are planned in small places, but I thought it's a great time to start to brainstorm, especially seeing where everybody's from all over, New York and the region, to think also how can we do it in all the other regions of the US for our chapters and divisions. And if we all identify the easiest way for us to do that, it can be replicated. It's not something that each chapter has to come up with their own unique way. If we come up with a couple ways of small tools, and I think the 10 steps are good. There's around 4 of them that we can do, and we could explore next aspects. But it's been a fascinating process. I mean, Brian and I started out over a year ago with it at Georgetown, and our first one with youth, and then they concluded with the UPR Diplomacy Dialogue at Roosevelt House with over 100 people, and people can watch those live webcasts as well, with Eric Garner's mother speaking there as the keynote speaker. And then, like I said, just a week ago tonight, we wrapped it up in Geneva. And now we're in that really, the 4th phase of the adoption, and it's all of us just making sure that our government knows that we know the UPR happened, and that we think it's, some of those recommendations will be really important, and they're all related to ideals and inspiration we share as UNA members. And I guess I'll stop there and just open up more for questions and discussion.
Yeah, I was just wondering, your recommendations for what each chapter could do are good, and I'm just wondering how we're gonna get that out to all the chapters. Is that gonna be after the annual meeting, do you think, Ginger? Or is there something that we could send out from Chris Whatley before that,
Ryan, what do you think? And Joshua, do you think that Chris would be up to sending out something
Yeah, absolutely. There's the chapter leader update. There's
Yeah.
teleconferences. There's plenty of platforms, and Joshua and I were talking about maybe engaging some very prominent folks on the U.S. side, on the importance of the UPR and making sure that it's not just this one-off event in Geneva, that civil society know about these recommendations and stay engaged.
One of the questions that I had was, we did something on the CERD last July and produced a shadow report to the committee and so forth. And yet that is part of the UPR. I mean, part of what's addressed there is in the UPR itself. And I was thinking maybe we could also have some kind of an update in the middle of the summer, a year hence, to see what we have done, what's happened in this country, what we need to do. And I wonder whether that sounds plausible and how that relates to the UPR itself.
Yeah, there are, of the 300 plus recommendations, many of them did deal with the issue of racial inequality and racial justice. So I think we could definitely include. There's also the 1-year follow-up of CERD, but even the committee, it's a very, there's no real way for civil society to participate. Like, I'll be there in August teaching a class during the CERD session, but it's not formal that you speak and you give things. It's much more informal. So I think it's a great way, especially since they happened in 2 years, all 3 treaty bodies and then the UPR this year, that it's a great way to build on CERD. And some of the recommendations by different countries did say, how are the implementations from CERD going and what can be done? So I think that it fits in that way. Ryan and I talked as well about Ambassador Harper. So when I was there at the consultation before I left, he said, definitely let me know dates and that he'd be willing to do that. So we were brainstorming a bit before at the during the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues and started that, so we could see what's possible that Watley could send out. And then the other is, I think if we do have it polished, and it's already written out, so it's not something we have to retype even, but if we could hand that out to leaders on June 7th through 9th, maybe have, we were talking even about, Ryan and I were thinking about even having a booth or a room, and people could go in and shoot their video there while they're already there, while the topic is on their mind. So we figure the more we set up and the more there's examples, and there'd be, I think even a social media toolkit, Ryan, you mentioned?
Yeah,
or-
it should have been sent out.
that people can participate that way. So I agree with you. I think it is important to have the initiatives ready to go. And
Well, it would be good if we got it before, let's say, June 1st, because we'll be having our board meeting, and then I could see which ones of the, how many are the main, are there 10 main recommendations, or?
there's 10 steps, but
10
there's
steps.
technically no more than 4 right now, because there were
Okay.
10 steps for the entire
Process.
process.
Okay,
So I'd say there's 3 to 4.
all right, so, but we should zero in on which ones that we think are the most important, and at least I could bring that up to the board and find out how
Yeah.
they
Yeah,
fit in.
and just a real quick note, and I brought the reason I ran out of the room is I wanted to bring this. Joshua had this idea of bringing UNA into the UPR, and it seemed like a lot of work at the time, and it was a lot of work, but very much like a uphill climb challenge. But we put this out just as a poster last 2 members' days ago, and we ended up getting a wonderful response. We had 5 consultation events across the country, more than 100 UNA members participating. We focused on trafficking, LGBT, gender equality, and the treaties. And we submitted the report to the UN, and that was just one step. But tracking the recommendations that were made to the U.S., a lot of them had direct overlap with the recommendations that we sent, which is great news. 2 of them on trafficking and gender equity, focusing on the issue of equal pay for equal work, actually seemed quite similar, like Xeroxing or lifting directly from the report from Portugal and Serbia. Now I just think that's amazing. So if you think that again it's a little cloudy about the impact you can have, or it still doesn't seem quite realistic that you can actually impact a process in Geneva. I think the results of the recommendations, show otherwise, and there really are outlets for civil society to participate. And I was just looking at some of the recommendations. Some of the recommendations that were discussed in this room and in the room about 10 feet away appear pretty close to verbatim. in the recommendations made to the US, and I think that that's really, really exciting
Congratulations.
That's great, yes,
great,
congratulations
great.
to everybody.
to everyone here.
Yeah.
Great.
And I remember that site, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I actually
you were
remember
here.
that. right
Joshua
here.
was here.
I actually remember that as well.
You
And
were here.
one other thing, because actually I just came from the meeting of Birmingham Mayor, Mayor Bell.
Mhm.
Just met with him at the Waldorf Astoria, and we convinced a mayor to host a UPR conversation at that level, right before the Selma march, and then march with Obama over the bridge. But that was an example of also, which we didn't think of when we came up with the 10 steps, but that's a great thing to say, ask your mayor to have a UPR consultation on implementation of recommendations, and they picked marriage equality because Alabama Supreme Court was messing around with that. They looked at the issue of sentencing, racial profiling, education, ending poverty, immigration, and homelessness. So they took all the global things that are talked about in Geneva and then said, well, let's look at it in our town of Birmingham and see what's next. And we just met today and they're like, we want to have a follow-up meeting with the mayor, and he did press conferences with us and everything before the adoption in September. So it's going to commemorate the bombing of the church where the 4 girls were, and that'll be September 14th right now. So, I mean, it's one of those things of, depending on the creativity and who we work with, you can talk to your mayor, and then it's no longer a Geneva process as well. So the UPR consultations that we did were great in our community and our chapters and divisions, but then everyone could go back and go, wow, the Conference of Mayors is in San Francisco, I'm gonna go and talk. So there's a lot that can come out as well of new things. So it did start out with Ryan and I just trying to convince everyone, and there's more, of course, that I think we could have done, but considering we did it with as little as we did, it's amazing to be able to, exactly as Ryan's pointing out, show a meeting and then show a recommendation. And this is just our next step of making sure those recommendations then don't just end. Because most people are excited, like, oh my gosh, the US, the review, I watched the webcast and then, okay, all done. But the exciting thing is now it's the real work of implementation and making sure that we improve our country in a positive way. And truthfully, when we meet with all the governments around the world, they're like, we want the US to be strong because it makes the world stronger and human rights moves a lot farther. And we really hope the US does implement and leads this way. And even the allies gave great recommendations of what we can do in a positive way. So I think the UPR is a really positive tool, and we can be creative. Also, in this whole process, UN Wafuna, when I was at the Human Rights Council, asked me to give a small talk, and I met with South Africa and Austria and other UN associations around the world who are like, wow, we're coming up and we never thought of these things. Can we use the US as a model? So it's great to see the ripple effect of how that's being replicated around the world. So I think we should definitely not stop now in step 4 and 5 and try to go to new levels. So I appreciate the question on different ways that we can be ready for the June annual meeting to make sure everybody's ready to go and prior.
Joshua, you put your finger on the affinity groups of mayors and cities. I mean, of course, that's the experience with CEDAW, where Cities for CEDAW developed to support something that was difficult on a national level. And I think you also pointed to affinity groups. I mean, whatever it is in justice or the different areas. I mean, this country is so much a agglomeration of affinity groups. And if we can reach out to those affinity groups in the areas of direct interest for them to develop a constituency that starts out from that subject matter but then expands into the whole range of UPR.
And we have UNA Women, and we have
Right.
the LGBT group.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention something that came in as a report last night from Stephen Miller, who's acting president of our brand new Mid-Hudson chapter, and they gave us a 1-year report, which I've shared with everybody. But to share with you, Joshua and Ryan, their first event last fall was on understanding human trafficking locally and internationally. Then they did Human Rights Day at the FDR, and that's the 3rd year that has occurred. And they did it on bringing human rights home, inequality, race, and the United States. And they have they have high school and college human rights interns, which they plan to keep on helping through the next year. And they have asked next year's group with planning and hosting a student-led human rights conference. So it fits right in, and we just need to give them the feedback and what Yeah, what they can do and how they can become most effective so, as we work together.
And two things. One real quick is, I think that's another way too for UNA to really be relevant and connect with other groups in the community as well. And that's been a great way for us to reach out. Where all of a sudden, they're like, UNA, we thought you only look at issues around the world and you don't care about what's happening at home. And that's been great for Hawaii. It's been great in other cities where we had the UPR events. So I think that's really good that we can reach out with NAACP has asked me to come and give talks at their events. Honolulu chapter is actually growing. And we've done more interaction and coordination of activities, even co-sponsoring events that go beyond UPR of what we think is important related to human rights. So that's been really good. And then on that note, the one idea we did have, especially, we had it before and then after we went down to Alabama and as well as into Atlanta, Georgia, was rights riders in the same spirit of freedom riders, in the sense that it was rights riders. It could be a high school student, a college student, or anyone in the community wanting to be a rights rider fellow. And all they would do is they have a little toolkit. It's the recommendations that came out of the UPR. They go to their high school, their college, their temple, their, church, YMCA, and say, hi, have you heard about, we're having an event tonight, have you heard about the UPR? Of course, someone goes, UP what? Well, this happened on May 11th, would you like to see a couple clips? What issues do you care about? Here's some of the statements about the US, here's the government, great responses. Here's the 340 plus recommendations, are there any you care about? One thing we're looking at is even making a website kind of like the world we want, but it'd be the country we want, or the democracy we desire. And it would be, everybody could vote of the 342 recommendations, what's the top 6? So we can make it an interactive website. And that'd be great too, because no one's ever done that for their UPR, to get their citizen involvement of what recommendations really were important to them. And then if we can't get the fancy website, which we probably could, because a high school student would be like, I can make it tomorrow, No problem, watch this, look, it has bells and whistles, and
That's true.
here's you on da-da-da-da-da. That's phenomenal. So I think, we should aim for that. And the Rights Rider Fellows are great because anyone can go and do whatever they want. It's not a real, I'm there saying, how are you doing it? It's like you go and present and talk to people, and then you just see how many people you spoke with. You can see the results on how many either selfies or videos they took or phone calls they made. And so it's just showing simple steps of how people can sincerely participate in the UPR and continue on some of the success Ryan has pointed out.
Corinne?
I just had a question, and this probably shows some ignorance, but in light of the fact that there are UNA chapters in other countries of the world, is there a way to foster that more direct connection such that it works along the lines of getting on the delegation for the Commission on Status of Women, or getting on a delegation, in other words, getting on a country delegation, so that there are, because you noted that there were countries who echoed the UNA US recommendations within the broader dialogue, and that it would be interesting if those UNAs in other countries could try and influence the delegation or even get on a delegation. I don't know quite how it works in terms of
For UPR?
the UPR, but,
Oh.
but thinking of how it works for the Commission on Status of Women or others, that they would actually be able to sort of channel some of that through the countries in which they're resident.
Yeah, no, intriguing. The way that we focus on it with UPR is it's civil society doesn't get to speak really in the UPR in the 3.5-hour process. So it's the interaction phase, and that's why we did those diplomacy dialogues in DC with embassies, and then missions here in New York, as well as, I guess I hosted around 6 of them in Geneva. So the next level of what you're saying would be interesting. The main way those UNAs around the world were interested in us was that their UPRs are very superficial, shallow, and not as engaging, where there's only specialists who, the big NGOs, Amnesty, does the work, and then there's not a community conversation. So they were very intrigued of, I told them they always have to do 3 levels of community, country, and global civil society, and most UPRs are really global, and the grassroots community aren't aware of them, and that's one of the things we really try to do here in UNA USA was to go community. For their own UPR is how they're looking at it.
Yeah, right.
But on a fun note, like if we have the energy and the time in the 3rd cycle, you would technically UNA as a global would be able, that they would also contact us and say, they would say, we want USA to ask our country this question.
Right.
Right.
So
right.
that-
It
That
can
could
both
go,
ways.
and the easy thing is, I've learned is every country has their UPR writer. So I know the person in Ottawa who writes the UPR question. I know the US person who writes all the UPR. So those people do exist. On the other hand, I don't know if if you have enough people and they have the energy, UNA around can connect that way and do those things. It's a lot of, I'd say it's the next level of advocacy.
But I do think it's important to have the other UNAs, UNA Portugal, working on its own UPR. This is
100%.
really important,
Yes.
yeah. So I think we can have an influence on, I have a question because I only got 3. LGBT rights, human trafficking, gender equity, and is the other one, the prisons?
That was the treaties,
The treaties. Okay.
which
Yeah.
included what, CEDAW and
Yeah.
child's rights
and
and.
Economic Social
Right,
Rights
right,
Covenant
right.
and CRPD as well and disability.
Yeah, I just couldn't remember, and somehow it got dropped out of the minutes.
And
Okay.
Marshall, again, was one of the UNA members who went to one of the UPR meetings convened by Josh's group where they were giving the UNA USA recommendations to diplomats who were there talking
Yeah.
about issues in the US. And I think you covered trafficking?
I did gender equality.
Gender equality.
Yeah.
And again,
And we got 2 minutes,
yeah.
not 1 minute and 4
Right, you
seconds.
guys were, and everybody was,
Awesome.
Peg, did you do one of those also?
You were there,
Ca-
weren't you? Yeah.
Kathy did the trafficking, Kathy Moran.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's right.
Uh-huh. Okay, other questions for Josh? We will film you, we will put it online so that chapter members can look at it.
okay.
And we greatly appreciate your coming here, and just let us know whenever you're in town and we'll try to work it
Okay.
out.
No, I'm here for the next 2 weeks.
Okay, and then after that.
That's all. Let me just say that, I thought it'd be open. I'm here for the next 2 weeks around town, so I'll be at the Sustainable Development Goals negotiations in Alpec, Columbia. They're doing a business and human rights event right now, so.
Okay, and we will see you in Washington, those of us
Yes.
who are going.
I will see you this Sunday for sure.
Sounds
Great.
good.
All right, aloha, thank you.
Thank you, Aloha.
Aloha.